if we think about process, like if I'm coming to you and we've gone over the requirement, I understand either credit restoration or if I'm just ready to get funding, what is the timeline for that process like? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This is episode 9 of the King's Court, and this is, I think, one of those fundamental conversations that everyone needs to hear about. One thing that I was trying to understand when I started in this business was how to scale. I see all these crazy stories. There'd be a woman who's 6 months pregnant and all of a sudden 3 months later she's at $50,000 a month. Some random college kid who scaled up to $100,000 a month. And we could just never figure out how it was happening. And I finally was able to connect with a couple people in the community, and we started to understand a little bit more about the back end, the conversations that weren't necessarily happening, but that was where and how these people were able to scale up. And that one hidden component that a lot of people don't talk about is funding. Capital is so important in any e-commerce business, specifically Amazon, when we're talking about having to invest so heavily to be able to scale up your business. And if you're not liquid, if you don't have a great corporate job that you can pull money from, or if you don't have a lot of savings in the background, how do you scale up? And that one thing that you don't hear a lot about is funding. And so I was lucky enough to connect with my buddy Phil a couple months ago, and he told me about Brian. And he said, Brian is the guy. I've used him myself personally, and so many of my students have used him, and I need you to connect with him because he's going to be the key to you taking your business to the next level. And I started the King's Court to have these personal one-on-one conversations. And I think this is perfect for the platform because I really want to spend today talking a lot about what the process is, who's it for, and how does it work if you're looking to scale up your business. And so with that, I want to introduce Brian Halstead to the podcast and have him talk a little bit about himself, his organization, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty about how you can get funded.
Absolutely, Omar. I appreciate, first and foremost, the invite for having me join you guys today. So my name is Brian Halstead. I'm the CEO and founder at Advise Consulting. We are a business funding organization, and my primary focus is helping entrepreneurs within the e-commerce sector with a key focus on Amazon secure low interest capital. The one thing that Omar had mentioned, right, is any business, they're always needing capital, whether you're just getting started or you're scaling. And I kind of have a story that personally relates, and I'd like to touch on that if you're okay with that, Omar. But a lot of times, people ask me, how did you get into this space? And I myself, right, I started as an e-commerce reseller. Okay. I met Phil probably about 4 years ago in another e-commerce community. And I had scaled quickly, right? I had done over $100,000 in less than 30 days. And the one fortunate thing that I had was I did have the corporate job that was providing me the ability to inject the capital. But the one thing I noticed is that very quickly, I maxed out my credit cards, I drained my checkings, and I drained my savings account. I was profitable, but the one thing that tanked alongside with all of my funds was my credit score. So the number one thing that a lot of people don't realize is, you can pay your credit cards on time, but if you are over that threshold of 30% utilization, your score is going to take a hit, right? It makes up roughly 30% of your overall credit score. And that was when I realized, there has to be an easier way to this. Now, this is where it kind of takes what I had gone to school into account. And I was a finance major, a corporate finance major to be specific. So I worked in the realm of corporate banking, investment banking, and I knew how it worked. This is where I realized that if I could tap into the relationships that I had and start leveraging capital from the banks instead of my own money, I could scale nearly 3 to 4 times quicker. So I went ahead and took the initial leap, and that's when I funded myself my first $100,000. But I did it in a way that was a little bit different than the traditional conventional way of lending, and that's you get personal loan. I tapped into the business funding realm, and why did I do that? Well, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that when it comes to business and personal funding, you can max out those business credit cards without it affecting your personal score. Okay, that was an absolute game changer because now I knew how to get the capital, I knew how to get lots of it. And ultimately, this is what allowed me the ability then to take my business from six figures to ultimately seven figures in revenue on Amazon. Once I mastered the art of that, that was when I realized, you know what, there's a lot of people, as you mentioned, Omar, that, are stuck. Maybe you're contemplating, how do I get started, right? You've got all these gurus on social media teaching you how to get started. But the one thing no one ever showed you was how to get the money, right? And regardless if you're in e-commerce, retail, construction, you're going to need capital. And that was really the birth of Advise Consulting.
I love it. I love it. And so we talked about this a little bit earlier. I think what I would love to do is because we have a really wide variety of people who tap into the shows, to the podcast. We're talking about beginners who've sold, a couple of dollars or have sold nothing, to people who have been in the business and are looking to scale, and seven-figure sellers who are trying to take it to eight figures. So maybe let's look at the way that you can help people and look at specific scenarios and talk through what that process, might look like depending on what your profile looks like. So
Sure.
if someone comes to you and they're just a really fantastic candidate, they have, 750, 800 credit score, and they're in the Amazon business and they're looking for some funding, $50,000, $100,000, whatever it may be, even 20,000, whatever the number is, what would the process of getting funding look like for them?
Yeah, so we start with what we like to refer to as the Cinderella checklist, right? The minimum requirements generally with the banks, and I'm going to take two steps back. We have two different types of funding that we can start with. For most e-commerce resellers, if you're just getting started, right, you could have all the hustle, you could be, have the best business idea, but if you don't have the financials, generally the banks are not going to lend. So what we generally are tapping into is to get started 0% interest business funding. Now, the one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that with an optimal credit score, right, depending on your geographical location, but if you're in a state outside of Alaska or Hawaii or even Nebraska, for the most part, right, we can get you $150,000 plus at 0% interest for a term of 12 to 18 months. Now, backpedaling a little bit on that, I wanted to touch on some of the key requirements. Generally, you have to have a minimum credit score of at least 700. We need to have at least 4 primary accounts that are in your name. We need to have at least 1 personal credit card that has a minimum limit of at least $10,000. Your credit utilization, meaning how much of your credit are you utilizing, needs to be at 10% or less. We also cannot have absolutely any derogatory marks. So no late payments, no collections, no repossessions, no bankruptcies, anything negative over the past 24 months. And then last but not least, we want to go into the funding sequence with 3 or less hard inquiries over the course of the past 6 months. Now, I know you may be thinking, Omar, right, a lot of Amazon resellers and e-commerce folks come to us and, they say, man, Brian, I check, all but maybe one of the boxes. Maybe I thought I made a payment, but there was a late payment. Does this really mean that I'm not qualified? And the answer is yes and no. Okay. If we go in and we are getting 0% APR funding, this is going to be no doc funding, meaning no proof of income, no tax returns, and no collateral. So we have to make sure that the credit score, the credit profile is built exactly the way the underwriter wants to see it. Now, if you've got a late payment, you've got a repo, you've got something that's derogatory on your credit, the good thing to note is that is the reason why we've also built the credit restoration arm of the business. So maybe you check all the boxes with the exception of 1 to 2. We'll put you through our credit repair program, get those negative marks removed, and then at that point we can circle back for funding. Now, on the inverse, if we have a more established e-commerce Amazon reseller that, maybe you're already doing the revenue, you've got a LLC that has been open for a while, then we can go in for what we call doc funding. Okay, so this is generally where the bank is going to want to see a balance sheet. They're going to want to see at least 2 years of tax returns as well as some bank statements. But the good thing to note is when you go into that realm, that's where the pockets get really, really big with the banks. We're talking high 6-figure, even 7 figures in funding. if you really need that to help scale your business.
I love it. And so if we think about process, like if I'm coming to you and we've gone over the requirements and I understand whether I need to either do some credit restoration or if I'm just ready to get funding, what is the timeline for that process like?
Yeah, so if a client is truly qualified, right, the way we generally start it is we'll have an initial consultation. This is a time where we will go over what the bank is requiring. We'll outline the specifics on your front, right? Does anything need to be adjusted? And then ultimately, how much capital do you need? Shortly after that, within about 24 hours, we're going to provide you with a funding agreement, right? Obviously agreeing to our contractual terms just to make sure that you truly understand the services that are being rendered. After that point, we will put together a funding sequence, and the funding sequence is going to consist of the steps that are required leading up to the funding process. But all in all, Omar, it's not uncommon, right? We've gotten clients over $100,000 in sometimes less than 14 days. Now, if we need a little bit of cleanup, or maybe the client doesn't have the necessary injectable capital that we're going to need to maybe make some deposits in the bank, we might need to get a personal loan, right? We might need to move funds around. But I've had clients say, Brian, this is amazing. I've got an interesting story. I've got a client that actually works for the credit bureau that is building their Amazon business in parallel, right? He wants to leave the corporate world, as a lot of individuals do. I funded him $155,000 in a matter of 10 days. And it blew his mind, right? I mean, the fact that we can inject that amount of capital into one's business, some people don't even make that in a full 12 months. And this individual received it in about 10 days.
Perfect. So if I'm a person, so I might be hearing this conversation for the first time. It's like, oh, wow, this has really unlocked something new for me and it's interesting. And now, I know as we think about e-commerce, it's, kind of a cash intensive business. And so now you've given me a bit of a formula to be able to say, hey, I can take this cash and now get this inventory that I need, cover X, Y, Z, whatever it is, whether it's a new warehouse or a VA or all these different things that you're going to need to run your business. But what do you say? Because I know there are some people who are like, oh my God, money, I can get the money. I want the money, but I have no clue what I would do with it. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, the one thing I like to say, right, is that we're here to build the success story, right? I'm not a predatory funder where I'm just handing out money to those that are really not ready to receive it, right? I always tell people you've got to be rich in the mind before you're rich in the pockets. And so if you have not touched this amount of capital, right, the last thing we want to do is get what I like to call shiny object syndrome, right? We're going out, we're buying jewelry, we're buying cars. The goal here is not to buy liabilities, right? So if someone comes to me and says, hey, Brian, the number one question I ask them is, what are you going to do with the capital? If you come back and you tell me, I don't know, it's not that I don't want to get you the capital, but I want you to be successful. So generally I would recommend, right, put your head down for 30 days, right? Really do some internal, analyzing to determine what is it that you really want to do. Maybe it's a matter also. I have individuals that come to me and say, hey, Brian, I came across one of your ads or someone referred me to you. And then they say, I don't know what to do with it, right? And I said, here's what we'll do. I'm open to funding you at least $20,000. And what I want you to do is take that $20,000 and go invest in a mentorship, right? Go take the money, invest in yourself, and then when you come back, we'll fund you six figures. And I've had countless, students. I had a gentleman this morning that I had spoke to that's in the restaurant business. And he said, Brian, just having the conversation with you has opened up so many new ideas, right? Because a lot of times, right, you get individuals that are coming with an employee mindset. You've got to shift your mindset. Not everyone is built to be an entrepreneur, but when you've been coached, right, you've got the right mindset, you can take things like this and truly build, a lasting legacy for you and your family.
Beautiful. So, I mean, I think that's also just really good advice for the person who knows what they're going to do with the money. But just take a little bit of time before you go in and you get a pile of $50,000, $100,000,
Right.
and really think through what that looks like. How much of that is going to go to inventory? What are you going to do on the admin side? How are you going to prepare? Because the other thing about getting that influx of money and then all of these sales, there's going to be a lot that's going to come with that. And so if your process isn't in place, if you aren't prepared, how if you're doing FBM orders and you're shipping stuff out, or if you're getting stuff out to FBA, like what does that process look like? And when you're scaling at that magnitude, it's going to change your world. And if you're not ready for it, that's also something for you to think about. So
Yeah.
I will. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, just something.
No, no, I was just going to say, I mean, to that point, investing in building out your systems is key, right? Because once the funds start to parachute into your business, they're going to drop very, very quickly. And that generally, if you're taking advantage of the 0% APR business funding, the clock starts once the credit, the business credit card ships. So we want to make sure that we've got our relationships established. We've got our VAs in line, right? You've got your prep centers, everything ready to go. That way, once the capital's there, you can inject it in your business and really start scaling.
Perfect. And so I'll frame this, kind of around you a little bit, but also if someone's thinking about funding and even also credit restoration, what are the types of things? It's like we're hearing this conversation. It's like, oh, this is great. Funding. Oh, if I'm not in the right position, I'll get some credit restoration. Then I'll get the funding. But, and obviously, I wouldn't have you on if I didn't believe in your organization and you. But if I'm coming in and I don't know Brian, and maybe I don't even know the Gap King, and why should I trust these people? What are the types of things that someone should consider when they're thinking about credit restoration or funding your business? Because while I believe in what you guys are doing, and I know you've worked with a lot of people that I'm familiar with, I see a lot of stories about predatory funders or predatory credit repair that don't really do much. What are the types of things that somebody should consider before they go ahead and sign up with somebody?
Yeah, so first things first, I generally say, I mean, and this is one thing that I think differentiates us. We meet with every single client over Zoom. Okay. I tell clients all the time, right? If you and I, especially in the credit repair space, if you and I are going to be working together, right? You need to find someone that you like, and you can trust. They're going to be in possession of your personal information. So you want to make sure that, is this someone that's trusted in the space, especially when it comes to e-commerce, right? We're doing exclusive funding for, Phil's group. There's also a number of other Amazon coaches that we do funding for as well. Okay. The other thing is there a contract in place. Okay. You won't believe the countless number of individuals that come to me both on credit restoration and funding. And I say, have you taken a look at the terms of the contract? And they say there was no contract. And I'm like, how did you get your documents to them? And they're like, oh, I text them to them. Those are generally things, and you do not want to. You generally don't want to have happen, right? So you're going to want to make sure that the person is, reputable. They are respected. And then the number one thing I tell people all the time is, make sure that, ask them to show you their credit, right? What have they done? Have they funded someone or fixed someone's credit? Maybe that is in the same space that you were in, right? So you want to make sure that, again, funding for real estate is a little bit different than funding in the Amazon realm. And I think that specifically when it comes to e-commerce, we know that space very well, right? Myself being a seven-figure Amazon reseller, I can speak the lingo. I know how and where to inject the capital into, and finding that way to relate to your client is, I think, some of the things I would look for personally if I was in the market for credit restoration or funding.
I love it. And so as we think about like getting started, so if a person is ready today, they've figured out kind of where they sit, they need some help with their credit, they're ready to go, they don't need help with the credit, and they want to get funding, like what are the next steps for somebody to start to have that conversation with you and your team?
Yeah, so with us, generally what we do is we book a free credit consultation. Again, there's no cost. We hop on a Zoom, we'll review the credit report in depth, and then we put a game plan together. Now, I get clients that, some come to me with an 800 credit score and others come maybe with a 520, right? But the reality is we all have the same goal at the end of the day. And so we will put together an individualized game plan for you to ultimately get you where you need to be. Same thing on the funding side, right? We will conduct a Zoom. We're going to do a full credit analysis again to make sure do you check all the boxes? And if you don't check the boxes, how and what can we do to get you to that point so then we can get you the funding that you're needing to either start or scale your business.
Perfect. So, and it just popped into my head now. Actually, I'm like, hey, like I fit into one of these different spaces. Like, where am I in my journey? Because funding obviously is something that everybody needs. And I realized, like as a person who was bringing Brian on, it's like, oh, you think Brian's a good guy, you trust him, that's great, and maybe I should use him. But I'm actually going to use Brian myself to get funding. And guys know my story. Like, I need a little bit of a credit restoration, so we're gonna go through that process now. And I'd like to just run through my journey and keep track of that. So if you guys are thinking about getting some funding, feel like you need some credit restoration, I'll walk you through what that looks like. And Brian has kind of talked a little bit about what the onboarding looks like. So I've kind of gone through that, and we're going to start the process very soon here. And so the podcast may be your first introduction to Brian, but the next piece will be, kind of watching me going through, my journey and getting to my funding success story. So I think that'll be a great way to kind of give you guys a little bit more trust in the process, knowing that, I'm also doing it myself and not just, providing you with a guy who I just randomly met who might not be trustworthy. I trust him enough to use him myself. And so I think that'll be a great, kind of foray into what he can provide to you and the rest of the community. So we'll do that for sure. And then the next thing I want to do with Brian, so I thought an intimate one-on-one conversation would be a great opportunity to introduce him to you. We're going to have a community call where you guys can ask questions. You can hear from him directly, and actually, that's how we normally bring people on, is we do it live, and we let you guys ask questions live during the presentation. So that'll be next. I'll get that on the calendar. But we started with the podcast. We're going to watch my journey as I go through the process with Brian, which I'm really excited about. It should be interesting to see how everything goes. And then we'll also bring him back to the community call, and then we'll figure out some other things to do, because I think, again, for me, when I started, it was one of those secrets that just no one was really explaining, that was right there under the surface, but I never got to until I just kept asking enough questions. And so I think it's one we're going to talk about a lot over the next coming months, so that we can help unlock that opportunity for other people in the community. And so with that, Brian, I want to thank you again for coming on the King's Court. I think what you're providing to the community is really valuable, and I'm looking forward to seeing how we work together and the things that we can do together in the future.
Absolutely. And Omar, very grateful. Thank you for having me today. Very much look forward to the opportunity to a live session with your community. And I encourage you guys, bring the questions, right? Whether it's credit repair, whether it's funding, personal funding, mentorship, etc., right? Bring your questions. I'd be happy to address them for you.
Perfect. And so the links to everything will be down below. We'll get you the opportunity to check out information on funding from Brian. And also, if you need that credit restoration, that information will be in the description too. Until then, we'll catch you later. It's the King's Court.